Ladies and gentlemen, we are in for a treat today, and I truly cannot wait for our masterclass, which is going to be given to us by Niven. Niven has held executive positions since she was 29 in a career that has spanned multiple sectors and roles. Before starting up her own consultancy and embarking on her PhD in organizational behavior, her positions included Chief Executive Officer of the Businesswomen's Association, Head of the South African Reserve Bank Academy, and Head of Leadership and Culture for the Standard Bank Group, the largest bank by assets in Africa. Having started her career as a strategy consultant, she now works as a strategy leadership and culture advisor for global clients in industries as diverse as financial and professional services, retail, media, transport, and manufacturing. Niven is the author of If You Don't Do Politics, Politics Will Do You, is a Harvard Business Review and Inc. contributor, a part-time tutor at Cambridge University Institute of Sustainability Leadership, and has been invited to be a guest lecturer at Stanford University. She's an expert facilitator on women's leadership development programs around the world and serves as the chairman of the board of Kotlins, an NGO that for the past 87 years has done cutting-edge work in the early childhood development sector in South Africa and beyond. I'm sure I speak for our audience here today to say I'm super excited for the insights we're going to be getting from you today. Ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome to Niven.
Thank you, Amanda. And it's lovely to be here and to amplify a lot of the stuff that Mandisa has said. So we have half an hour for me to take you on a whistle-stop tour of politics and the things that in my career I was completely allergic to for the longest time. I wore my refusal to engage in politics really as a badge of honor. And it's a pity, as successful as I was, the challenge is that I actually didn't know what I was talking about when I said I don't do politics. And somebody said to me the other day, well, you know what they say about books, right? And I said, I don't know. What do they say? They say, you write the book you were meant to read. And I said, well, that's very true. Because I wrote the book that I needed to read. I teach about the things I didn't know I needed to know. And really at the heart of everything that I do is trying to bridge the gap between two numbers. So the first one, 79% up on your screen, comes from the Gartner Engagement Survey. It's run annually in organizations around the world of all types at all levels. And every year the result is depressingly similar and familiar. 79% is the result of their engagement survey. And you might be thinking, well, 79% is not too bad. No, let me correct you. 79% is not the level of engagement. It's the level of disengagement that is being found in organizations around the world. And this disengagement can be both passive and active. So passive, we've all heard talk of the great resignation. People pitching up at work or sitting at home and just going through the motions of what they're doing. As a friend of mine says, the wheel is turning, but the hamster is dead. So that's one option. But you can also have active disengagement, where people come to work and they actively undermine their team, their manager, their company. I mean, it sounds unbelievably perverse, but it's not something that's unheard of. And I read a study the other day that said in the US, manager or people that were interviewed were asked about foregoing a substantial pay raise. So you could either have a substantial pay raise, and substantial is obviously relative and subjective, or you could see your immediate manager fired. 47% of people said, I'd rather see the manager fired. So we've got something quite broken in organizations, I think, in terms of culture, in terms of reward, in terms of remuneration, in terms of leadership behaviors. And it's amplified. The tragedy of this is amplified by the fact that Mahai Csikszentmihalyi, the psychologist who coined the term flow. So you may not know the term, but hopefully you know the feeling. That feeling of when you're just completely immersed in something. And what you're doing is so fascinating and so absorbing that you actually lose track of time. You lose track of time for a few minutes, a few hours, and you kind of come back from whatever it was you were doing. Be it work, be it exercise, be it something creative and artistic. So Mahai Csikszentmihalyi coined this term, and in his work, he found that 80% of adults, 80% of all of us, if we were to become financially independent, you know, make a great investment, get a bequest, win the lottery, whatever, so that we did not need to work, 80% of us still want to work. Still want to work. We want to contribute our talents. We want to develop our skills. We want to be part of something that matters. And so for me, this is the ongoing dilemma and challenge and opportunity for all of us. How do we bridge this gap between the fact that most of us are wired to want to do something meaningful, and yet the way we have set up organizations in all manner of means makes people just drag themselves through their day, through their work, through their career. There's a problem here, and I think there are many reasons for this, and I see it in the work I do in culture, in leadership, but it's certainly something I see in the work I do around office politics. Because if you don't have the political will to engage in the reality around you, you probably are going to become disengaged. You are probably going to tear your hair out. And so I really want to amplify some of the points that Mandisa made. These are the 5 myths of office politics that I wrote about 2 years ago. It was my first article for the Harvard Business Review, and it really did seem to strike a chord with a lot of people. And these myths are myths that I've realized in my career, reflecting on it. They're myths that I heard coming back at me from delegates all over the world. And they're myths that I have put into the article, not in the book, but I speak about all the time now. So, absolutely, could not agree more. I heaved a sigh of relief when Mandisa spoke, because I thought, oh, at least we're on the same page, as opposed to me having to just put on my screensaver expression because I completely disagree with everything she's saying. I completely agree with everything she's saying. This myth, certainly this myth I had for most of my career, of the either or, it's wrong. It's not an either or. It can be. It can be. It doesn't have to be. And I think the biggest reason for the either or is because most of us do not actually understand what office politics are. So this definition is one that I share in lectures, in workshops, and when I ask people for reactions about this definition, which comes from another lovely Harvard Business Review article called How to Play Politics Without Selling Your Soul. The things that strike people about this definition is, oh, first of all, hold on, you know, that's not negative, necessarily negative. The second thing is that people often start to shift in their seats and get a little bit uncomfortable because, okay, I think I do those things. Yeah, that definition about the informal, the unofficial, the behind the scenes efforts. Yeah, I can recognize some of the things I do in that. Oh, for heaven's sake, are you telling me I play politics? Yes, I'm telling you, you play politics. You may not have called it that. You may be doing it for all kinds of virtuous intentions in all kinds of decent ways. But if you are playing in that informal, unofficial space, you are playing in the political space. As one of my facilitators says beautifully, you know, you've got your job description. There's a lot of white space on that page. There's a lot of white space in your KPIs. It's in that white space where nothing is written that the political starts to come into play. And it reminds me of a billboard I saw years ago in Lagos when I was visiting my sister who was living there. And it was a huge billboard. I was stuck in unbelievably bad traffic. And this billboard says, you're not in the traffic, you are the traffic, which I thought was genius and exactly right. It's the same with politics. You are in this one way or another. Because essentially what we're talking about here is a kind of currency, a kind of capital. But it's not the currency and capital that we used to in terms of money. It's a relational capital. It's a political capital that comprises 4 things. Firstly, exactly as Mandisa said, your strategic relationships. Who do you know and who knows you? And beyond that, not just who knows you, but who's prepared to support you. And this doesn't only have to be people who are more senior to you. Lateral support can be just as powerful. Downward support can be just as powerful. That's a whole long story. So it's about your strategic relationships. It's about your power. Where you sit in the organogram generally does correspond to your power. I mean, you've got higher decision-making authorities, you've got larger spans of control, you've got larger budgets, the more senior you are. But it's also about influence. And influence doesn't sit anywhere on an organogram. Who actually makes things happen? Who is listened to? Who is consulted? Who gets informed first? And then lastly, it's about your reputation, your brand. What are you known for? Are you known for being the drama queen? Are you known for being the person that people go to make things happen? Are you known for the person who makes things more difficult than they should be, or more fabulous than you thought they could be? All of these things reinforce each other for better or for worse. And the more you have of these, the more political capital you have. The more political capital you have, the more you can get things done. And exactly as Mandisa said, it's not just about you, it is about your team, it is about your stakeholders. And frankly, you can choose to ignore everything that I'm saying, everything that we're saying. This is your life, your career. Make the choices you think make sense. But I implore you, when you make those choices, for heaven's sake, know what you are talking about. And not getting involved in politics because you think it's not that important. Well, all teams, all departments, all organizations have got two sides to them. Of course, they've got the formal side, the delegations of authority, the things that you see in the annual reports, in the job descriptions. Those things are real and they matter. But just as real, just as important, is the informal. And frankly, if you only take your lead from and only operate in the formal space, well, it's like playing soccer on half the field. It's Wimbledon, tennis on half the court, rugby on half the pitch. You're putting yourself and your team at a huge disadvantage. Also, to amplify what Mandisa said, the second myth I came up with was this fantasy. And it's a fantasy that you're going to avoid politics. No, okay? Telling me that your organization is political is like telling me that water is wet. Yes, of course it's political. Your family is probably political. I have a friend who was a church minister and for 10 years led a congregation. She left to go to corporate. So nervous about corporate politics. After a few months, she said, oh man, these guys are beginners compared to church politics. So absolutely, the quote from Bowman and Deal is one that I include often. It's not whether organizations will have politics, but what kind of politics they will have. And so you really need to understand that what kind of political environment you're walking into matters. And there's a spectrum of normal here. There's a spectrum of inevitable here. Minimally, moderately, highly politicized environments. Large organizations, old organizations, matrixed organizations, you can practically guarantee they're going to be highly politicized. And so when people say to me that politics are a symptom of a bad culture, no, bad politics are a symptom of a bad culture. But politics are a part of every culture. These are normal. These are inevitable. What is not normal? Sadly, I think what is becoming more common, but is still not normal, is pathologically politicized environments. This is when we talk about toxic environments. And I'm starting to get concerned that people throw the word toxic out quite loosely and quite freely. Toxic is very particular. Toxic is a synonym for poison. What is poison designed to do? To kill you. And when I say that these environments will kill you, I am not speaking metaphorically. I am not engaging in hyperbole and exaggeration. I am speaking literally. The toll that these environments will take on you, because they are environments of constant, unrelenting fear. Fear of being sidelined, fear of being humiliated, fear of being ostracized. If you're in an environment like that, the stories that I've heard through the years of lecturing, the stories I've seen in my own career, are frankly heartbreaking. And my advice to you is, if you are in that kind of political environment, that's not normal. 3 words: run like hell. And when I said this in a workshop a while ago, a woman said to me, I hear you, but I cannot afford not to work. I am the breadwinner in my family. And that may be true of many people listening in. And I hear her. What I said to her was, exactly and precisely because you are the breadwinner, you can't afford not to work, I agree. But if you stay in this job for much longer, you will not be able to work. And then the problem really becomes quite difficult. So before your confidence and your competence is entirely destroyed, which is what an environment of abuse does to people, I implore you, please start to look around for other options. It is not you, it is the environment, and you need to get out. The third myth, absolutely. If we had more time, given that this is an IT audience, I'm sure many of you know the blockbuster Netflix story, or think that you do. I thought I did. I've worked in strategy my whole career. No, you know, Blockbuster was this strategically obsolescent dinosaur, didn't see technological change, didn't see Netflix coming. Nonsense. That's actually not what happened. It was power and politics. If you want, I can send you the slides and the case study that I've put together. But in summary, what I'm saying, what Kathleen Kelly-Reardon is saying, what all the research in my PhD is saying, is that it is all politics. It is not enough to work hard and to have talent. I'm not saying that hard work and talent are not necessary. Of course they're necessary. But I'm saying what Kathleen Kelly-Reardon is saying, what I think our panelists are saying is, it's not enough. And we can have a long, fat conversation over a bottle of wine, maybe 2 bottles of wine, about how the world should be and how in an ideal world these things would be enough. Absolutely. I am not a cynic. I don't wake up in the morning to bemoan the state of the world. But I'm also not a raving idealist and this wide-eyed, naive youngster. Somewhere in the middle is pragmatism. And in this world that we do want to be better, but that we also have to accept where it is, in this world, your technical skills are not enough, particularly the more senior you get. And I often see, particularly women, having what I call a but problem. Not a B-U-T-T, a B-U-T. They have the technical skills, but they don't have the relational skills. They want to make things happen, but they don't want to get involved in the politics. They see the change that needs to be implemented, but they don't have the right person supporting them. Or worst case scenario, they have the wrong person against them. The moment you flip those buts to ands, let me tell you, something fundamental starts to shift, and quite powerfully. Fourth myth, didn't we all have fantasies? Well, I don't have to put on makeup, I don't have to deal with the traffic, and oh, hallelujah, virtual environments. I'm on Zoom for 2 years. I don't have to deal with office politics because I'm not in the office. What a joy, what a bonus. Wrong, okay? Decisions around secondments, around bonuses, around promotions, around retrenchments, around all manner of things. These decisions are still being made. And it doesn't matter if they were being made or are still being made in a virtual room or a real room. And so one of the most important pieces of advice I got in my career, and it's advice I'm giving you, is that some of the most important decisions of your career are going to be made when you are not in the room, whether that room is real or virtual. And so who is in that room for you and what are they saying? That is a function of your political capital. I also strongly recommend you go watch Carla Harris's TED Talks, about 15 minutes, where she talks about getting people to be in the room for you. It's a wonderful talk, 15 minutes of your life, very well spent. A delegate said this at a workshop a while ago when I was talking about this. She'd been one of those people who'd been a circle on a screen on virtual meetings for 2 years, hadn't maintained her relationships, hadn't built relationships, hadn't picked up the phone to have the conversations before the meeting, after the meeting, because, well, you know, it's virtual, nothing really is happening. We had a long conversation about it, and at the end, she looked at me, she looked at the other delegates, and she said, you know what, this stuff hasn't disappeared, but I've disappeared. I thought that was a profound insight. And the last one is this idea that it's a trait, it's something you're born with. No, absolutely, some people will find this stuff more obvious, more easy, more natural than other people will. No question. But for most of us, the majority of people I've ever worked with, lectured to, or engaged with, this is a skill that you have to learn. This is something that if you want to learn, if you see the importance of it, you can and you will. So those 5 myths for me are absolutely critical Because if you're headlong into these myths, you're going to have zero political will. Of course, you're not going to want to engage in this stuff. But if you can start to crack those myths, or at the best, bust those myths, well, then hopefully you're starting to get some energy and rolling up your sleeves to say, okay, I get this, I understand this, now what? Well, now what is all around your political skill. And I have tons of videos on my website, a workbook that you can download for free, where you can work your way through some of these skills and how good or how bad you are at the moment relative to where you want to be and where you should be. And so the first thing around political skill, and the last thing, and everything in between, is that it is always about people. I mean, I really do find it hilarious that we talk about human resources. When did people become resources? People are not resources, they're also not capital. They are the source of every single thing, good, bad, ugly, magnificent, that is going to happen in your team, in your career, in your life. How are you thinking about the people that form your strategic relationships, that form your tribe, that form your network? How are you thinking about your stakeholders? I include a story in my book about an incredibly interesting woman. She was in her early 40s. She was in the top 6, so she was on Exco of a company with 60,000 people. Very successful, very well regarded, very impressive. And you know, you don't have to be on Exco to be successful. We all have very different definitions of what success is. For her, that was her version of success, and in that version, she was astonishing. And she told me a story just in passing that made me suddenly understand a whole bunch more about how she'd gotten to be where she was. And she said that every month, from the moment she started her career, so as a young grad, 20, 25 years before, she would sit at the beginning of that month and she would think, who are the people I need to have a conversation with? Ask for advice, give information to, get information from. In other words, she mapped her stakeholders, and every month she would then deliver against that map. And the next month she'd start again, and she'd do it again, and she'd do it again, and 25 years later she was still doing it. So this was not an afterthought. This was not something she got to when her inbox was empty, in other words, never. This was a practice and a habit that built her and built her network and built her career for years. The second thing is really understanding that when it comes to work, what is the point of work? The point of work is to get things done. So if at work we make friends, well, that's wonderful. I have made some deep and lasting, incredibly precious friendships through my work, but it is not the point of work. To get things done, in fact, friends, the people who unconditionally support you, kind of like your dog, kind of like my mother who thinks I can do no wrong. Friends are not what you need. And you've probably got fewer friends at work than you think. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because that's not the point of work. You've also probably got far fewer enemies than you think. People who are unconditionally, no matter what you do, against you. Most of the people at work are sitting in the much more nuanced, much more interesting space of being allies or adversaries. They are conditionally for or against you. Do you understand their conditions for supporting you? Do you understand why they're not supporting you? Are you remotely curious? To ask and to find out. I have a mentor who always speaks beautifully about quiet your cleverness, Niven. It's great advice. How many times do we ask, listen, get curious, as opposed to assume we know the answers and that everyone sees the world the way we see it? And so breaking news for those of you who, like me, were taught by your parents, treat others the way you would like to be treated. Wrong. Actually, when it comes to work and politics and relationships, we need to be treating people the way they want to be treated, which means asking how they see the world and what matters to them. Doesn't mean we'll always be able to meet their conditions, but asking is a brilliant way to start to build relationships. And then the last one is really stay focused on what matters. We are bombarded at the moment, in this country, in the world, at this time, with all manner of things that are demanding our attention. I mean, yesterday it was snow. Today, who knows what it's going to be. We leave our house, we run a gauntlet of all kinds of things that are breaking down, all kinds of things that are desperate. And when your energy is dispersed a millimeter in a million directions, it's very difficult to stay resilient. It's very difficult to be effective. So stay focused on what matters. Stay focused on the things that give you energy, that build you, that support you and nurture you, as opposed to being distracted in a million ways by the million things that are asking for our attention. And with that, let me give you one lesson. I have got a few, but let me give you the most important lesson about how not to drive your career off of a cliff. Einstein was apparently asked once, what's the difference between genius and stupidity? To which he apparently replied, genius. Well, genius has its limits. In other words, the ways that we can be stupid are infinite. There are no limits. Let me give you one example of how you can drive your career off a cliff politically. And that's when you become the problem, capital letters. You matter. What you're trying to achieve in your life and your career matters. But organizations are not democracies, they're not fair, and they're certainly not all about you. When you cannot get over changes that are happening, you need to decide whether you still want to be part of an organization. And if you do, then becoming the problem and making it all about you means that fantasies are going to start to happen in the minds of those people who are having to interact with you, engage with you, deal with your drama, deal with the fact that you can't get on with things. And those fantasies are not pleasant fantasies in terms of your future. They're fantasies about how much easier their life would be if you were gone. So in your political strategy workbook, which again you can download for free from our website, the first question I ask you in that strategy, are you becoming the problem? And then, like a game of Monopoly, do not pass go, do not collect 200 Rand, sort that out. Nothing else matters. And then lastly, you know, the what of politics, the so what of politics, of course they matter. Busting these myths, developing your skill. But now what? What do you do with this? And what you do with this is you craft a strategy. And all strategies are contextual, and all strategies depend on many things. So they depend on you understanding the landscape. They depend on you thinking about yourself and what you want. And really there's 5 steps. What do you want to achieve? How many times I sit with people and they don't know. What do you want out of this quarter? What do you want from this project? What do you want at this time in your career? What do you want from this company? What do you want? And then how are you going to get there? Thinking about that, understanding what leverage you have, what skills you have that are unique, that are special, that are in demand, that you can use, what relationships you have that can support you, what relationships you have that are against you, and then all the way through, using your energy wisely. Strategy is about focus. Strategy is about clarity. Strategy is about commitment. And so your strategy to your own political advancement, exactly as Mandisa said, not just for your own sake, but for the sake of your team, this cannot be underestimated. And so we have a video, well, I have a video, which unfortunately we can't play, but it's from The Office, where one person asks the other person, what's the best piece of advice I've ever given you? He gets the answer, don't be an idiot. When I think of something and doing something, I think, would an idiot do this? And if they would, I do not do that thing. This is my plea to you. Don't be an idiot around this stuff. I was an idiot for most of my career. I was hugely successful, despite being an idiot. But trust me, there were times that were painful, and there were times where I could have been more successful. Don't fall into the myths of politics. Don't see this as an either or, black or white, good or evil. Don't ignore the skills and think that you just don't have the personality or the aptitude. If it matters, you can develop them. And for heaven's sake, don't drive your career off of a cliff. Live to fight another day. Thank you.
Sure. Yo. I don't know about you, but like so many like key insights, I've been trying to like take down as many as I can. But thank you so very much. And I think you left us as a punchline. Don't be an idiot and don't drive your career like off a cliff.